Thank you, Dr. Zul. I think that serves like a very good kickstart to our discussion today on not just post-Islamism, even though that's the topic for our session. We can also relate it to matters related to civil Islam, as we have touched before. So I would like to open the floor for questions. There's a lot of interesting discussions. You could also relate. Of course, Dr. Tajuddin is here.
Ihsan. Oh, camera. Oh, so that I can be accused of. Okay. It's funny. I grew up. I'm not sure whether I'm considered as an Islamist or not, but I grew up with this notion from the United States with MISG, although not a member, but having a following through, and then coming here, knowing this party called Parti Islam Malaysia, following it, supporting it very long time, and putting it into the minds that the idea of Islam being the savior of society, you know, those kinds of things. And now suddenly we have a twist of situation that the so-called Islamics are now actually knocking the idea of the rule of ulama, the Iranian style rule of ulama, is actually knocking on the door of this country. And for some reason, suddenly I'm introduced to a discourse by such persons as Farid Musa on the idea of, hey, this is not such a good idea, okay? And now how do we then, not to say backtrack, but redefine it and things like that. So I think this is the basic thing that I'm trying to, the background of what I'm trying to say. So I'm trying to look at how are we going to, not say backtrack, again, I don't think anybody is backtracking here, but how do we redefine? I think that's the word for it, okay? So to me, my idea or solution is, number one, is the idea of democracy, okay? I don't know whether you realize it or not, but nobody understands the meaning of democracy, okay? If a villager don't understand that, that's one thing. But I have taught thousands of students, and now they are professional architects. And now I work at universities, and I meet with professors, with all these kind of people. None of them knows what democracy means, okay? Democracy means that this government, what you call the word government, actually the real government, you know, by the people. The people is the boss. These people, and I have to stand up in my Dewan Kuliah and say, your father who paid the tax is the boss, okay? You are the one who's supposed to guide these people that you sent to parliament. Now, no one, academics or students or professionals understand that it is this idea that people are the one who actually is the boss of the country. This person called Najib and all this minister, Rahman Dahlan, these are the wakil rakyat, your wakil. And this civil servant, that's why they are called servant, you understand? And I have to explain all this to these people. So one way that I'm looking at this idea now you're looking at the idea of Islamism, okay, and redefining. Why don't you, because you're missing words like secularism, okay, and this Islamism now, and then I think this is a very, very, now becoming a very controversial discourse. Now people are blaming that you are not caring about Islam or wanting to be something like that. So to me, why don't we, you know, or IRF, start looking at the idea of, you know, democracy, and we have so many people, quote unquote, educated. Okay, educated meaning they have gone through university, but educated is a big term. I call it artificial intelligence. Okay, because so when the question comes, will computers take over our jobs as graduates? Yes, I said, because what you've gone through in the university is artificial intelligence. You're just imitating things. You don't have any critical view about things. Sorry, I'm from the university, private and public. I know what I'm talking about. Okay, it's artificial intelligence, unless they come to my class. Yeah, no, that's true intelligence. So I'm just saying that. I'm just saying that. Do you want? Can we not have a kind of a movement to teach and educate the idea that rakyat is the one who is the boss, and therefore we sidestep the idea of this idea of Islamism and ulama rule, defining the Quran and all that, giving the role to the rakyat. Because at the moment you're just arguing intellectual and intellectual, political to political, this kind of thing. But no one understands that the role of the rakyat, civil society, and professionals, especially professionals, they still look at the leaders as the leaders, kissing their hands and things like that. So I ask you to kiss their hands. You just sent the servant over there and you kiss his hand. What for? Is it something like that? They don't understand this. Sorry to be a bit long, but to the backdrop of that, that's the question.
Thank you, Hassan. First to Prof. Hefner. You know, like when you were explaining about this Al-Vawar idea of post-Islamism and of course Cyberjaya, he has written a book and I read his book on post-Islamism. I think that when you were saying that post-Islamism doesn't concern about getting power, I doubt that. No, I still think that post-Islamism is about getting power, but it's about interpreting it in another way rather than being concerned or being obsessed with implementing the Sharia or Islamic State or Hudud. Post-Islamism would focus more on establishing justice, equality, good governance, and so on and so forth. So what is your take on that? That's the first question. That's to you. To Dr. Zainal, you know, when you quoted this Abdullah Naim, he was a guest of IRF before, and he created furore, right? Just like Mustafa Akil recently. You know, when you know you mentioned about his book, right? What do you call? To be a good Muslim, I need a secular state, right? I think what he meant was not only because when you mentioned it's about a state would basically, you know, an Islamic state would normally enforce one particular view. But I think what he really meant at that in that instance was that why he needs a secular state is that a secular state will be neutral. A secular state, you know, a Muslim, a true Muslim would conduct his duty as a Muslim. Say, for example, if a woman chooses to wear hijab, for example, it's not because the woman is scared the state apparatus would fine the woman, but it's just because out of piety. A person, a male Muslim who goes to for Friday prayer, for example, it's just because of piety, out of piety, not because he's scared this Jais and Jakim would come after him for not going for Friday prayer. So that's the idea of this secular state, and I hope you could explain that. And of course there'll be one question for the Zul as usual. You know, like when you talk about this second generation political Islam, I mean, you have mentioned this many times during our forums, and I think I would like to know for sure that this second generation political Islam has basically abandoned the idea of an Islamic state. You know, you have to be certain, you know, you have to state it clearly that, you know, our intention is not to establish an Islamic state, because otherwise there is no difference between second generation and first generation, right? Yeah, can I get your response, please? Thank you.
Thank you very much. I quite agree that post-Islamism still has a regard. You're absolutely right. And if I gave the impression that post-Islamism was about giving up any concern or attention to the capture of the state, that was a misstatement on my part. What I was trying to say was actually much more in agreement with what you said subsequently, which is that post-Islamism understands or aspires to a kind of state who understands the realization of Islamic ideals in a different way than at least the first generation of Islamism did. In other words, there's, as a result, whether it's in Iran or whether it's in Egypt with the split in the Ikhwan, or whether it's in Tunisia, which I think is arguably the most interesting of the Muslim Brotherhood examples, where one sees not so much a split, but a real substantive engagement, very, very thoughtful engagement with the challenge of a complex society that has that is overwhelmingly Muslim, but also includes a large number of secular Muslims. And I think this phrase in the context of Tunisia is apt, because this is how most of that population self-identifies. So for whatever process, whether in Iran as a result of disenchantment with or disappointment with the cultural and ethical achievements of the Iranian Revolution, or whether in Egypt as a result of a kind of fractious fissure between different wings of the Ikhwan, and the emergence of a kind of Islamic Renaissance from within, if I may, from within the Ikhwan, or whether in Tunisia, where I think there was a much stronger consensus. The Brotherhood didn't dissolve. It had the great benefit of having a remarkable, gifted leader in the personality of Mr. Ghannouchi, who was never just a pious man, although he is a very pious man, was never just an engaged man, but was a man who looked to and spoke with, among other things, social scientists, people like Al-Stepan, who we've talked about several times over the course of the next days. Ghannouchi was a good friend with Al-Stepan. Al-Stepan is a political scientist and theorist of democratic transitions, and in the last 10 years of his life, dedicated himself to the study of political transitions and cultural change in Muslim-majority countries. So for whatever reason, so we have a number, we've talked a lot about contexts in this national contexts over the last 3 days. Although the national context varied, I quite agree with you, Bob, that we see the emergence of a similar second generation of Islamism. I actually do sort of prefer that phrase, or a new generation that recognizes that, if I can put it much too crudely, the capture of the state has been fetishized, and much more attention has to be dedicated, as Ghannouchi shows, most to the empirical task of exactly how does one realize those values to which Muslims aspire. So it's a shift towards a less utopian understanding, yes, utopian and simple understanding of Sharia, to, yes, a far more substantive and maqasid-inspired understanding of how what Islam's aims are, and how the realization of them in the world requires a constant cultural and, I would add, civil initiative, not just directives from a powerful modern bureaucratic state.
Well, probably not much, but I agree with you. I mean, neutrality is also mentioned by Naim, and that's a very central point he made. Although I think sometimes it's not clear, but he also implies the notion that neutrality doesn't mean that there should be no cooperation between state and religion. So it doesn't close that possibility. So referring back to the term which is used by, again, Alfred Stepan, he uses the term principled distance. So there is cooperation, but there is also a principled distance between state and religion. And he gave the example in Indonesia, India, and Senegal, which basically means taking principled distance between religion and state to avoid majoritarianism. So I think that's an important addition to the notion of neutrality. That it doesn't close that possibility of cooperation without falling into preferring one religious group, majority, for example, over the other. So, yeah, that's all. Thank you.
Yes, if I may respond. Saya bacakan dengan izin. Saya bacakan apa yang menjadi visi perjuangan Parti Amanah Negara. Menjadi parti Islam utama di Malaysia sehingga wujudnya sebuah negara yang adil, beramanah dan rahmah untuk semua. To strive to be the premier political party, yeah, to forge for, if I may translate, a just state, accountable, and a total blessing for all. Yeah, of course, these are motherhood statements. You will know that very well. But there again, it is stating very clearly, Dr. Farouk, that we have, in fact, very clearly shift away from that narrative of Islamic State. And on that basis alone, you could recall, while I was in PAS still, we have made a big shift in the manifesto of 2008, prior to the establishment of Pakatan Rakyat. And I was in the team when perhaps it's our think tankers who have coined and framed that. Apa yang kita perjuangkan adalah negara berkebajikan, that benevolent state. So even, of course, whether they really truly believe or just tag along with us, now it's becoming clearer, and perhaps it's a great blessing that we have come out and have our own space, our own platform to advocate this establishment of a civil state that very strongly enjoins Islamic precepts, references, and principles and values. So it's quite, away from the idea of an Islamic state. Attached to it is, of course, the implementation of the punitive, the corpus of legal prescription of hudud, qisas, and ta'zir. I mean, not hudud particularly. The ta'zir is already, well embedded in the civil law, perhaps. So, yeah, I have no qualms to pronounce it again and again that we strive for the establishment of a civil state that, the underpinning principles are those that I've said. So, yes, although we do not announce it like Ganushi, we have shifted away from, but that is it. That is our narrative, and that's what we stand for. And those who want to be with us must subscribe to this. Of course, sometimes you see, it's a mass political party. Once in a while, people relapse into the kind of, the default mode of whatever. But this is the mainstay. This is the main characteristic. This is the main conviction of Parti Amanah Negara. Thank you.
No, you haven't done that. So I'm going to remind you. Right, so just to reiterate, I'm trying to resolve this thing because at the moment, the so-called, quote-unquote, Islamist is knocking on the door. All right, so here we are discussing secularists, you're using the word secularist and you're going to get hit. What, you don't want an Islamic country? That sort of thing. So what my point was simply that instead of dealing with that, then you sidestep the issue. It's a basic PhD strategy. You can't argue against that. You create a different framework, and then you go with that. And my framework was that to tell the rakyat, to tell the people that the power is in the rakyat, not in the so-called whatever state that is. So if you were to say that, look, you can be a good Muslim, and you are the boss, and you are the idea. But at the moment, Malays, Muslim, they look upon whoever is the leader, that's the leader lah. Cium tangan and all that, and Ustad lagi lah, whatever the heck it is. So this is to me, I can see, and I have a lot of conversations with professionals. They are still looking at who's going to be the boss. See, you are the boss. What are you talking about? We tengoklah Ustad mana yang baik, that sort of thing. I mean, I think for an so-called quote-unquote educated citizenry, I think that's a really poor aspect of it that no one has touched on in this place. Because as I said, I'm at the university, both part of the university, and the level of understanding about governance in a democratic civil society very, 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 very low. Okay, in that regard.
Let me just respond. I think quite clearly, even Reformasi days, we have always campaigned and advocate ketuhanan rakyat. And all this has been, it has, perhaps Prof. Tajuddin baru memulakan campaign of this nature. We have for decades now. Yeah, perhaps, you're right. So, but embedded in Pakatan Rakyat, embedded in this Pakatan Harapan, and well before, and I'm not trying to justify, but this has always been, rakyat adalah tuan. That's hakim. Rakyat hakim itu satu hal. Rakyat, because in election you are, if we fail on all our courts, we bring it to the court of the people. Itulah mahkamah rakyat dalam pilihan raya umum yang akan menentukan ala tuju dan laluannya negara ini. That has always been the narrative. Forgive me because I've got to make it clear to you that, we have always campaigned on that. And democracy has always been about rakyat being informed. You can never have democracy if rakyat dinafikan daripada informasi dan maklumat. And rakyat perlu mendapat maklumat kerana rakyat adalah tuannya, rakyat adalah bosnya, adalah majikannya. And all this, that seeking the reappointments to the rakyat every time, every cycle of 4 or 5 years, is because mereka lah yang memerlukan jawatan itu daripada rakyat. And the rakyat making that decision every 5 years to make them either to continue or just pension them. And that rakyat is, why the rakyat is now so more empowered is because they suddenly understand that sebenarnya kita tuan. Mereka ni every 5 years. Yeah. In between you get slaughtered. Because this is why we believe in a two-party system. This is why the government of the day with the opposition must be, you should not and never ever give, what you have for decades as what is known as the one-party dominant system. And you have that in UMNO. And you have that well before reformasi. But now, the emerging, construct of a two-party system, of not two-alliance system. So you're improving though. The professor in the university can always, hear that as no problem, no qualms. No, we will accept that. But let me tell you, that's how we campaign. That's how on ceramah trail, on ceramah circuit, that's the notion that you are telling them, look, you finally adalah majikan yang menentukan siapa yang you angkat sebagai kerajaan dan siapa yang you turunkan untuk dipensionkan. So I think that's well taken, in all due respect. I mean, but that democracy is surely something very pertinent. That democratic values must be imbibed, perhaps through our educational system. And the essence of democracy is, of course, check and balance. And the essence of democracy is, of course, separation of power. And all those are now trampled upon. There's hardly any semblance of democracy right now when all powers are usurped by the executive and the CEO and the top executive. You name it. Our democracy is a farce. Is dysfunctional, is failing because you don't have any semblance of a democracy, let alone a vibrant and functional democracy. Thank you.
Before we move to the next question, I would like to get response from Dr. Zainal, Pak Zainal, because Dr. Tajuddin mentioned about basically the lack of understanding of democracy, not just among the scholars, not just among the students, but also in some way the lecturers, the universities, the government staff, or more or less like the general Malaysian public, awareness of democracy. Just as a comparative view in Indonesia mainly, is how do you see the democratic awareness among the people, among the universities, academia as a comparative response to what Dr. Taj mentioned in Malaysia?
Difficult question. I mean, I don't have any data to respond to that. But, well, I don't know. I think, except Hizbut Tahrir, who was banned, I think no one is against democracy because since 1998, that's the common language which is used by everyone. So I don't think it's a controversial issue anymore. I mean, people in general accept democracy. Even FPI, the Front Pembela Islam, the Islamic Defenders Front, they accept that, although they always have adding with other some qualifications. So but of course probably also the issue is not whether people understand democracy or not, but democracy itself, it has many varieties, and it's been debated. I mean, there are many beyond electoral democracy. This is a very wide space in which there can be discussions about what shape of a democracy can be. So I'm sorry, maybe not very helpful, but I think so. I mean, a few years ago, I had a research on religious education, looking at the textbooks, including ones issued by the Ministry of Religious Affairs. I think it has chapters on democracy, human rights, and others. Although when we speak about religious education, the problem usually is not only textbook, but the teachers. Maybe the curriculum, national curriculum, is good. Bob mentioned that the civic education was partly designed by scholars at the Islamic University in Jakarta. So they are good, but yes. So there is civic education.
Is it saying it's good or is it bad?
Good.
Human rights.
Good. Yeah. Oh, it's good. I mean, it's very progressive. I can say it's very progressive at the national level. But as I said, usually the problem is in the teachers. The teachers, they don't get proper training. So there is good ideas at the governmental level. So actually, I was surprised when I did that research a few years ago, because people always complain about religious education is not good, it's not inclusive, etc. When I look at the government policy issued by the Ministry of Education and Ministry of Religion, actually it's very good. Well, my research was, I think, around probably almost 10 years ago. So it was already there. And then, although there are still news about one textbook is published in one place and it contains reference to Wahhabi ideology. Sometimes it appears several times, because textbooks is not controlled, but the curriculum, the module, in general, it's controlled. That is, if you want to get your school certified and others, you have to follow the national education curriculum, which applies to all public schools as well as the madrasah and others. And they have this module, the curriculum. But then the issue with the teachers and others, that's a different issue.